I had just supervised a major installation in Spokane and was heading east on Interstate 90 to see an old friend, Joe Neely, who lived by Lake Coeur d'Alene in northern Idaho. It wasn't my first trip to the Pacific Northwest, but it was my first time visiting this part of Idaho. Joe and I served together many years ago in Cherry Point, North Carolina. I had met his wife and the first of his 3 children and dined at his home many times. When he left, we promised to stay in touch, and over the years we frequently sent each other cards and letters. It had been several months since I had heard from him, so when I told him I would be in Spokane, he invited me to visit. I followed his directions and ended up parking in front of his wooden house, built on a wooded bluff overlooking Lake Coeur d'Alene. When I pulled up, he came out from the back of the house and we exchanged a hearty handshake and manly hugs. He looked quite a bit older than I remembered, but he was as strong as ever. "How are you, old salt?" he asked. "Fair to middling," I said. "How about you?" I could complain, but it wouldn't do any good, he replied with a laugh. "Come on in the back. I've got elk steaks on the grill and beer in the fridge." I could smell the barbecue, and the invitation for elk steaks made my mouth water. "Where's your lovely wife?" I asked, as he handed me an ice-cold beer. "She passed away a few months ago or so," he said sadly. "They diagnosed her with pancreatic cancer, but by the time they caught it, it was too late." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. "I thought the world of Wendy." "Thanks," he said. "She was a damn good woman, the best." "Are you dating again, or what?" I asked. He shook his head. "Nah," he said. "She made me promise to find someone after she died, but to be honest, I just couldn't do it. Once you've been married to the best, everything else pales by comparison." He dished up the elk steaks and we dug in. I had never eaten elk before, so this was a real treat. "How are you doing?" I asked. "I'm doing well," he said. "At least I get to enjoy these views every day," he added, looking out at the lake. "Wendy and I fell in love with this place when we first saw it, so we decided to stay. The kids come a couple of times a year, and I get to spoil the grandkids." She looked at me for a moment before continuing. "You know, Wendy wasn't my first wife," he said. "No, I didn't know that," I said. "I never told you about my first wife, but if it hadn't been for her cheating on me, I never would have met Wendy," he said. "I don't know if I ever told you this, but I read your stories in Literatica. I thoroughly enjoyed them." "Thanks," I said. "It's just something I do as a hobby while I'm on the road, just for fun." "With a couple of them, you really poke the hornet's nest," he said, smiling. "To hell with the critics, that's what I say. You keep writing." "I appreciate it," I said. "Maybe you'd like to write a story about what happened to me and my first wife," he told me. "Of course I'll listen," I said, pulling out an audio recorder. "Do you mind if I record this? I want to make sure I get it right." "Go ahead," he said to me. He started telling his story after I put the recorder on the table between us. Joe's story: I enlisted in the Marine Corps right out of high school in 1974. It was either that or spending the rest of my life working in my father's hardware store. After boot camp, I ended up at MCS El Toro in California. That's where I met Marcy. She was a year younger than me, and we hit it off very well. We dated for several months before I proposed to her. She agreed, and her father, a career Marine who served 3 tours in Vietnam, approved. We were married in a small religious ceremony and honeymooned in Las Vegas. I thought I had made it. Marcy was a beautiful girl with all the right curves in all the right places. She had long, curly blonde hair that reached above her shoulders, and she was a real beast in bed. That woman knew how to give a world-class blowjob. And yes, she swallowed. Plus, he was a bit of an exhibitionist. I'll never forget one night we were in the pool at the apartment complex where we lived in Anaheim. No one else was there, so she took off her bikini and threw it to the side of the pool. The next thing I remember, she had spread her legs so I could see her shaved pussy. Yes, that night she shaved her pussy for me. I wasn't stupid. I took off my swimsuit and walked over to the side of the pool where she was, with her breasts just above the water. When I approached her, she wrapped her legs around me and we banged like rabbits right in the pool. When we finished and got out of the pool, I wrapped myself in a towel and grabbed my swimsuit. But Marcy didn't. She just grabbed her towel and bikini and went completely naked to our apartment, which was on the second floor, in another part of the complex. Hell, everyone could have seen her if they looked. When we got to the apartment, she stretched out on the bed and started masturbating for me, spreading her pussy lips wide. Hell, she didn't need an engraved invitation, so I dove in and ate her out until she had another orgasm. Then we shagged some more and finally fell asleep in the early morning. That was the way things were between us, and I thought I was the luckiest man in the world. About 6 months after we were married, I received orders to go to Okinawa for a 1-year unaccompanied mission. We cried a lot, but we managed. Since she was going to night classes to get her nursing degree while working, we decided to keep the apartment. I was getting an allowance from my paycheck to pay the rent, so she only had to worry about utilities, which weren't many. She had her own car and hated driving my van, so that wasn't a problem. We made love the night before I left and promised to be faithful to each other and write every day. I hated to leave like this, but I had no choice. For the first 10 months, we wrote to each other every day, hot, torrid letters. I loved receiving her letters, as she always perfumed them, and I always got a hard on reading what she said she wanted to do with me. About 6 weeks before I left Okinawa, she told me that a friend of hers from school, Bridget, was going to San Francisco for a couple of weeks for a vacation and asked if I could come. I thought it wouldn't hurt, so I said yes as long as she kept writing me and told me how she was doing and where she was. He agreed and kept his promise for a while, but then the letters stopped coming. I kept writing but received no reply. A week before my departure, I went to the USO and called the apartment, but no answer, so I called her friend to find out what had happened. Bridget was about to head back east to join her boyfriend and told me that Marcy had decided to stay a little longer in San Francisco to visit some friends from high school. She didn't know who they were and had no contact information. Heck, I didn't even know she had friends there. Then the letters I was sending her to San Francisco started arriving, unopened and labeled "Address Unknown." What the hell? I asked myself. Where the hell was she? I started to panic, thinking maybe she had been kidnapped or worse. I called Marcy's parents, who were in San Diego at the time, to see if they knew where she was, but they told me they hadn't heard from her in weeks. You have to remember that at that time we didn't have cell phones or internet or anything like that. They offered to pick me up at March Air Force Base when I got back if I didn't hear from Marcy. As I thought about it, I realized there could be several reasons. Maybe he was on a bus back to Orange County, so I decided to wait until I got home in hopes that he was there. A day before I left, I called home again, but no one was answering the phone, so I called her parents and told them. They were not very happy with Marcy, but agreed to pick me up and take me back to the apartment. True to their word, they met me in March and took me to the apartment. It was dark when we arrived, and I saw no light in the apartment windows. Her father helped me carry my things up to the apartment. I opened the door and walked in, expecting to find Marcy. Instead, I found a dusty, lifeless apartment. Marcy was a meticulous housekeeper, but everything was covered in a thin layer of dust, as if no one had been there for some time. Her father and I looked around, hoping to find clues, but there was nothing to indicate that she had been there for some time. Most of her clothes were gone, as was almost all of her jewelry. Her father saw a pawn ticket on the dresser and gave it to me. I had no idea what he might have pawned, but I decided to call the store first thing in the morning. "Let me know if you hear anything," her father said as he started to leave. "If there's anything we can do, call." I thanked him and put my gear away. I searched but found nothing to indicate where it might have been. I went down to the garage and saw that my truck was still there. Marcy used to leave the car parked in a marked spot under an overhang, and it was still there. Where the hell is he? I wondered. I called the local police to report him missing, but they gave me the runaround. To hell with this, I thought, and went to bed. The next day, I got my first clues. I called the pawn shop number on the ticket her father found and learned that she had sold her wedding and engagement rings for $100. I was outraged. I had saved for those rings for months and had paid a bundle for them. The store offered to return them to me, but I refused. Enraged, I took the ring off and smashed it with a hammer. Later, while cleaning and picking up, I came across a stack of letters addressed to Marcy from someone in San Francisco named John. The letters dated 6 months before she told me about her trip. I couldn't believe she would leave me like this, but I had to know what was in the letters, so I started reading them. As you can imagine, they were as hot as the letters Marcy and I wrote to each other, but I learned something else. Reading the letters, it became clear that Marcy and John knew each other from high school and had been seeing each other the entire time we were married, meeting before school, or on the afternoons I was on duty at the base. "I hope your stupid husband liked eating my cum out of your pussy last night," one letter said. I thought I was going to puke reading that, but there was more. "Maybe I can get you pregnant and have your husband raise the child." "Wouldn't that be cool?" another letter said. There were more, and each letter pissed me off even more than the last. Eventually, it became clear that Marcy and John planned for her to stay with him in San Francisco. The trip with Bridget was nothing more than a cover, as they would try to make it look like she had simply disappeared. It was also clear to me that she had finished her studies and was looking forward to getting a nursing job in San Francisco. Of course, she did not tell me that she had finished her studies, but that was part of her plan. Angry didn't even begin to describe how I felt. I wondered how she could do this to me, to us. I had many opportunities to cheat on her, but I never did. I called her parents and talked to her mother, Ginny. "Hi, Joe," he said. "Have you heard from Marcy?" "Yes," I said. "She's living in San Francisco with some creep named John." "John?" Ginny asked. "John Calloway?" "Yes," I said. "Did you know that?" "No, I didn't know that, Joe," she said. "Marcy and John were a couple during high school, but I thought she cut him off when you started dating." "No," I said. "It seems she and John have been cheating on me behind my back for our entire marriage. They've been planning this for a while." "My God, Joe," he said. "I'm so sorry. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to divorce her," I said. "I understand," she said. "Is there anything we can do?" "Yes," I said. "You can go upstairs and take your things. I don't want them. All I want is my clothes, my TV, tools, and my stereo. Your car is still here, too." "All right," Ginny said. "I'll talk to her brothers and we'll go up and get her things this weekend." We ended the call and I started looking for a lawyer in the phone book. Damn, there were so many out there I didn't know where to start. I started calling and found one who could see me on Friday at the earliest. Friday, I thought. That was 3 days away. Mind you, that wasn't how I planned to spend my leave, but I had no choice. That's when I decided I had to find her and verify where she was. I looked through the letters John sent her and got her address in San Francisco. I decided it was time for a road trip, so I checked my truck, grabbed a few things, and hit the road. I stopped at the bank and closed our accounts, taking everything in cash. Marcy had already gone to the bank and taken almost half of what we had, but I still managed to take out a little over $3,500, which I thought would be enough to get me out of this if I was careful. I still had money left over from my stay in Okinawa, which I thought would help me get over the hump. It took me about 8 hours to make the trip, after fighting traffic in Los Angeles and Orange counties. I stopped at a motel upon arrival and bought a small camera and a fairly detailed map of the city and surrounding area. I studied the map and located the street and block that matched the address on John's letters. I decided to get something to eat and a few hours of sleep before doing any recon. I didn't plan to confront the bitch, but I wanted to get a picture or two of them together to show her parents and the lawyer. Early the next morning, I drove to the area where John lived and located the apartment complex where he and Marcy were staying. I parked about 100 feet from the front door and watched. I put on a ratty old baseball cap and sunglasses, hoping that would provide enough camouflage. It didn't take long to spot the two cheaters. John and Marcy were out the door and headed for a red Mustang convertible. John was wearing shorts and a t-shirt while Marcy was wearing a summer dress. I grabbed the camera I had with me and snapped a couple of pictures. From the way they were dressed, I figured it wouldn't be long before they left, so I waited. When he came out, I took note of his badge. John and Marcy. I ate one of the sandwiches I was carrying and waited and waited and waited some more. Finally, that afternoon, they came back. John got out of the car and opened Marcy's door. He wrapped his arms around her as he got out and kissed her. As they kissed, he lifted the back of her dress above her waist, and I could see that she wasn't wearing any panties. As they kissed, she pressed her crotch against his. She broke the kiss and looked around for a second and pulled her dress off over her head and threw it on the front seat of the car. John kissed her naked body and licked her pussy as she leaned against the car door, spreading her legs. I was taking pictures of the whole encounter, thinking they would make good evidence for my divorce. She took her hand to the zip of her knickers, and I thought she was going to bang him right there. It took everything I had not to pounce on them and beat the shit out of them right there. After a few minutes, Marcy pulled John back, and I heard him tell her to take her back to the flat and screw her. Marcy remained naked as they went through the gate and headed for her apartment. I waited a bit to see which apartment they were going to and noticed that there were no windows in the apartment from which they could see John's car. I waited a little longer and realized I needed to pee urgently. I had a perverse idea and walked to John's car and peed all over Marcy's dress, making sure no one saw me. Then I felt the urge to shit, so I did the only logical thing. Making sure no one saw me, I pulled down my shorts and took a shit all over her dress, making sure to cover as much of the inside of John's car as I could. Believe me, I didn't want to do that to a beautiful car like theirs, but I decided to screw it. If they were going to shit on my marriage, it was the least I could do in return. I also knew I ran the risk of someone seeing me and telling John, but at that point I didn't care. I wiped my ass with a towel John had in the car, then quickly pulled up my pants and ran to my truck. I had all the evidence I needed, so I drove quietly. After leaving the motel, I drove back to Orange County. I stopped at one of those quick photo places to develop the film, and 2 hours later, I had the photos and negatives in hand. I had just enough time to get a few hours of sleep, so I went out for a while, showered and shaved for my appointment with the lawyer. I grabbed the photos, the pawn ticket, and John's letters and was on my way again. That's when I learned that California was a no-fault divorce state. It didn't matter that she walked out on the marriage, sold her rings, and cheated on me the entire time we were married. Everything would be split 50-50. The lawyer asked me how much we had in the bank, and I told him the truth. Nothing. I also told him that she had already taken half of what we had. Besides, I added, she was earning more than me, even though she was only working part-time and now had a nursing certificate. I showed her one of her pay stubs, which showed that her take-home pay was almost double what I was making before taxes. He warned me not to try to hide anything, and I explained that I had just returned from a year-long assignment in Okinawa and was headed for the East Coast, so I could not drop everything and run to court. He assured me that the law provided for it and that I would not have to appear in court in person. I gave him the address where Marcy and her lover lived and suggested that she be served there. The lawyer took down all the information and said that papers would be drawn up and she would be served in a few days. If all went well, he said, I would be a free man in 6 months. He gave me his card and asked me to call him when I had a good mailing address in North Carolina. I gave her a cash advance and left. When I got home, I went to the apartment management office and told them I planned to leave Monday morning. I then scheduled the utilities to be shut off and set about packing and cleaning. When Marcy's family arrived Saturday morning, they emptied the house and took Marcy's car to San Diego. "What's wrong?" his father asked before he left. I pulled out the pictures I had taken and John's letters and showed them to him. His face went white. "That stupid one," he said. "I'm so sorry, Joe. I thought I raised her better than this. You didn't do anything to hurt them, did you?" "No," I said. "I wanted to kick the bastard in the balls, but I didn't. I figured she wasn't worth going to jail for. No offense intended, but I did do some work on his car." He looked at me funny. "What do you mean?" she asked. I told him I had pissed and shit on his car in Marcy's dress. He laughed. It seemed like the right thing to do at the time, I told him. He smiled and offered me his hand. "Stay in touch, Joe," he said. "You'll always be welcome in our home." "Thank you," I said. Finished for the day, I went out for a beer and a burger, then came home and tinkered on the floor since everything else was gone. That Sunday, I finished cleaning the house and loaded up my truck. I didn't have much, just my clothes, my TV, the stereo I bought in Okinawa, and my tools. When I had everything securely fastened, I put the top on the truck bed. One more night in the apartment and I left the next day, after collecting the bond and cleaning deposit. I still had some time left, so I stopped to visit my parents in Texas for a few days and then went to Cherry Point, North Carolina. When I arrived, I still had over $2,500 in cash, plus the check for the apartment. So I opened a new credit union account and moved into the barracks. A few months later, the lawyer informed me that the divorce was final. Apparently, Marcy decided not to contest anything and didn't even ask for child support. That night, I celebrated at a bar in town, and that's when I met Wendy. She was drinking alone, so I offered to buy her a drink, and she accepted. We started talking, and it turned out that she had just left her boyfriend, whom she had caught with another girl. We were both a little shy and took it slow, but after a few months of dating, we fell in love with each other. And one night she cornered me. "Do you like to eat pussy?" she whispered in my ear as we danced. At first I thought maybe she was drunk. As a matter of fact, "Yes," I replied. "Then take me home and show me," she said. I looked at her for a moment and she handed me her panties. "Now, Maureen," she said. "Yes, ma'am," I said. Walking her to my truck, she climbed in and began unbuttoning her blouse. By the time I got in the truck, she had already removed her blouse and bra and was rubbing her breasts, tugging at her nipples. She smiled and spread her legs to show me her wet pussy. I wasted no time in driving her home. We made passionate love for hours. When we finished, he raised himself up on one elbow and looked into my eyes. "You know, I'm strictly a one-man woman," she said. "And I'm not going to tolerate cheating. I'm strictly a one-woman man," I told him. "And I just got divorced from a woman who cheated on me." He smiled and hugged me. "Good," she said, kissing me deeply. That night I proposed to her, and she accepted. We were married in the base chapel a few months later, and the rest is history. "So, Joe," I asked, "did you ever see your ex-wife after that?" He looked at me and took a sip of his beer. "As a matter of fact, I did," he said. His father retired from the Corps about 10 years later and was opening a gun shop. He invited Wendy and me to celebrate with him and his family, so we did. I was stationed at Camp Pendleton, so we weren't too far away. By then we had 3 kids, so we hopped in the SUV and headed that way. He took another sip of beer. "She was there alone. Turns out she caught John cheating on her with another woman," he said. "She looked awful. I think she must have put on about 100 pounds since I last saw her. She saw us together and freaked out. I introduced her to Wendy and the kids, and I thought she was going to burst into tears. Then I leaned over to her and asked, 'Did John manage to clean all that crap out of his car?' She smiled and took a sip of her beer. 'I thought she was going to go crazy,' he said. 'Was it you who did that?' she asked me. I told her I'm not going to say anything and left. 'Did he ever apologize to you or explain why he did it?' I asked him. He shook his head. 'No,' he said. 'She never apologized, and I really didn't want to hear her bullshit excuse. Besides, what was done, and no words from her would change that.' He handed me a picture of him and Wendy with their children. However, Something good came out of all that, he said. What's that? I asked. If Marcy hadn't cheated on me, I would never have met Wendy, and those 3 precious children would never have been born, he said. Looks like 4 good things to me, I told him. He thought about it for a moment, smiled, and touched my beer bottle with his. 4 good things are, he said. And let's not forget 6 beautiful grandchildren and counting.